The state visit by President Frank-Walter Steinmeier is not just another royal jamboree at Windsor. It is the first German presidential state visit to the UK in 27 years, and it comes at a moment when London and Berlin are trying to repair both the emotional and the practical damage of Brexit while facing a war on the European continent. The choreography on day one was textbook monarchy as diplomacy. The Prince and Princess of Wales collected the President and Elke Budenbender from Heathrow, then handed them over to the King and the Queen for the full Windsor treatment. The Royal Dais in Datchet Road, a 41-gun salute, the German and British anthems, the Household Cavalry, a carriage procession through flag-lined streets into the castle. Inside they moved from private lunch to an exhibition of German treasures in the royal collection, Meissen porcelain, Holbein drawings, and the watercolour Schloss Russ, now that Victoria loved so much she called Germany her second home. It is intentional history writing, a reminder that Anglo-German ties are longer and richer than 1939 to 1945. The banquet at St George's Hall has then wrapped this history in Christmas lights and soft paper. A 20-foot fir tree glittered with thousands of lights in a hall dressed with poinsettias, mini firs and green gold ornaments, a visual nod to the German Christmas traditions imported by Charlotte and then Victoria and Albert. The menu itself was a culinary duet, British game and vegetables with a Black Forest Gatto-inspired cocktail and a German Riesling on the wine list. Seated among the politicians were cultural ambassadors Claudia Schiffer, Hans Zimmer, Motzi Mabuse, Axel Scheffler. The message is that this is a relationship of societies, not just governments. King Charles's speech did two things at once. In German and English, he praised the Freundschaft between the two countries and then moved quickly to Ukraine and European security. Britain and Germany, he said, stand with Ukraine and bolster Europe against the threat of further Russian aggression. The line was not accidental. State banquet speeches are cleared with ministers. It anchors the visit in the Kensington Treaty signed in July, the first formal UK-German bilateral pact since the Second World War, which commits both countries to deeper cooperation on defence, migration, trade, education, even a future direct rail link between London and the German cities. The King also did the cultural heavy lifting. There was the football joke about 11 playing 11 and in the end the Germans win, and a quip about a horse-drawn coach on the ultimate low-emissions vehicle. But the serious core of the speech was about how societies react to rapid change. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, he argued, social and political transformation has been unsettling and even frightening, and fear can curdle into anger and resentment. The counterweight, he suggested, is a renewed commitment to democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. In other words, this visit is framed as an act of democratic solidarity, not just nostalgia. Steinmeier's response was equally pointed. He described 80 years of peace between Britain and Germany as a gift and spoke of enemies becoming friends before pivoting to Brexit. The human ties between the two countries, he said, had been weakened after 2016 and now needed rebuilding. Students, apprentices and young workers should again be able to forge friendships across the Channel. He explicitly linked that ambition to the Kensington Treaty's practical measures on mobility and cooperation. The visit will underline this with two symbolic set pieces: his address to the House of Commons, a privilege not granted to Donald Trump, and a joint act of remembrance at the bombed ruins of Coventry Cathedral, mirroring Charles' wreath-laying at Hamburg's War Memorial last year. Meanwhile, in Downing Street, the political work continued. Steinmeier told Keir Starmer that relations are now in far better shape than in the difficult post-referendum years, but that Europe faces a new security system and therefore needs closer cooperation. Starmer replied that the partnership is going from strength to strength on Ukraine, migration and economic growth. If you zoom out from the carriages and the tiaras, what you see is the consolidation of the E3 axis, the UK, Germany and France, in a world where the United States is more erratic and Russia is trying to intimidate its neighbours. There are two coda points worth noting. First, this visit runs alongside Germany's deployment of the Arrow 3 missile defence system, its first stationing outside Israel, which will eventually cover German airspace against ballistic missiles as part of the European Sky Shield project. In other words, the Windsor speeches are standing with the Ukraine the Windsor speeches about standing with the Ukraine sit on top of a very concrete military architecture. Second, the pageantry didn't exclude dissent. Republic campaigners were pushed back into a designated protest area and warned about their loud hailer near the horses, prompting accusations of an attack on free speech and a brisk police defence about safety and facilitated protest. Even on the day of choreographed unity, there is an argument about how far defence or deference should go. So how do you read this state visit? On the one level, it's theatre, blue coats and bearskins, tiaras and Black Forest cocktails. On another, it's a deliberate act of strategic reassurance. Britain is signalling that after the self-inflicted turbulence of Brexit, it intends to bind itself more tightly to Germany, not less. Germany is signalling that in a Europe rattled by war and worried about Washington, London remains a serious partner, and the King, switching fluently between languages, quoted history and cracking football jokes, is doing the job monarchs are meant to do at their best, turning national memory into a diplomatic resource. The gifts tell the story in miniature. Britain gives a hand-carved walking stick from Mull and a first edition of Virginia Woolf. Germany gives Bach and Nutcracker, Christmas ornaments, and a certain deadpan humour, an umbrella. It is recollection and reconciliation in physical form. A shared past, a shared future, and just enough irony to keep the friendship honest.